You'll learn to love the boredom up here. That's what they tell you in training. The Lolo National Forest is 2 million acres of silence. My supervisor Dale had said when he dropped me off at the trailhead 2 weeks ago. Your job isn't to be a hero, it's to be a statue. You watch. You wait. You don't make up problems. I like that. I took the job at Tower 9 because I wanted to be a statue. I wanted to get away from a messy breakup, a dead-end data entry job, and a landlord who thought privacy was a suggestion. Tower 9 is a 14 by 14 box of glass sitting on top of a 40-foot wooden scaffold at 7,000 feet elevation. The view is spectacular. Endless rolling ridges of ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and larch. My routine was simple. Wake up at 500, coffee, radio check, scan the quadrants. I spent most of my time at the Osborne Fire Finder. It's this heavy, antique device in the center of the room, a circular map on a rotating table with a brass sighting ring. You peek through the sights, line up a plume of smoke, and read the azimuth, the degree, on the rim. It gives you the exact coordinates to call inches. I was good at it. I could spot a camper's illegal bonfire from 10 miles out. But on Tuesday, the firefinder showed me something that wasn't smoke. It was a 1400 hours. The sun was high and brutal. Heat shimmered off the ridges. I was scanning the south ridge, quadrant 3. There was a snag there, a dead standing tree, stripped of bark, bleached white by the sun. It stood out against the green, live trees like a bone. I used the snag as a landmark to orient my scan. I lined up the sights. Azimuth 112. I wrote it down in the logbook. 1,400. Visibility clear. Ref point, white snag at 112. I turned away to grab my water bottle. I took a sip. I looked back to the sights. The crosshair was empty. I frowned. I pulled back. The snag was gone. I scanned left, then right. There it was. Azimuth 115. I blinked. Azimuth 112 to 115. Azimuth 115. At this distance, 3 degrees was 50 yards, maybe more. I checked the logbook. Maybe I wrote it wrong. Number. The ink was wet. 112. Heat haze, I muttered. Elevation sickness. I rubbed my eyes. I looked again. The snag was still at 115. I grabbed my binoculars, heavy-duty 10-50s. I leaned against the glass and focused on the snag. It looked like a normal dead tree. 2 main branches pointing up like a Y. No bark. As I watched, a gust of wind hit the ridge. The green trees swayed, bending and rustling. The snag didn't sway. It was rigid. But as the wind roared, masking the sound of the forest, the snag moved. It didn't lean. Its roots lifted. I saw it clearly through the lenses. The base of the tree, the root ball, pulled itself out of the dirt with a wet, heavy motion. It looked like a cluster of our thicker fingers unclenching. The tree took a step. A long, lumbering, silent stride. It planted its roots again, 50 feet to the left. Then the wind died. The tree froze instantly. It became rigid again, a perfect, dead piece of wood. I dropped the binoculars. They hit the floor with a heavy thud. No, I whispered. No way. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, this is Tower 9. Over. Go for dispatch, Dale's voice crackled back. He sounded bored. Dale, I have visual on an anomaly in quadrant 3. Define anomaly, Tower 9. Is it smoke? Number. It's displacement. I have a landmark that is shifting coordinates. Displacement? Dale laughed. Did the mountain move, son? The tree moved, Dale. A snag. It moved 50 yards in 10 seconds. Silence on the line. Then a sigh. Tower 9, check your O2 levels. You acclimating okay? Elevation can make you see tracers. I'm not hallucinating. I watched it walk. Okay, look. It's hot. You're bored. Drink some water. Take a nap. If you see fire, call me. If you see Ents, write a book. Dispatch out. The line clicked dead. I stood there, furious and terrified. I picked up the binoculars again. I scanned the south ridge. The snag was gone from 115. I panned left. Azimuth 120. It was closer, and it wasn't alone. To the left of the white snag, a massive ponderosa pine green, healthy looking, was also out of place. I knew that ridgeline. There used to be a gap there, a clear view of the valley floor. The gap was filled. The pine was standing in the gap. I lowered the binoculars and looked at the entire tree line surrounding the tower clearing. Yesterday, the nearest trees were 200 yards away, a safety buffer. Today, the tree line looked heavier, denser, and I realized with a sick feeling in my gut that the clearing was shrinking. They weren't just moving, they were closing inches. I didn't take a nap. I spent the next 4 hours pacing the catwalk that wraps around the exterior of the tower. I had the binoculars glued to my face. They didn't move when I was looking at them. It was like a game of red light, green light. If I stared at a specific tree, it was just a tree. Bark, needles, stillness. But if I turned my head to check the north ridge and then looked back south, the formation had changed. A fir tree that was behind a boulder was now in front of it. A cluster of saplings had merged into a dense wall. It was subtle. If I hadn't been a lookout, if my entire job wasn't noticing changes in the landscape, I never would have caught it. By 1,800 hours, the sun was dipping. The shadows were getting long. I went inside to make coffee. I needed to stay awake. As I was grabbing a fresh filter from under the cot, my hand brushed against something loose, a floorboard. It wasn't nailed down, it wobbled. I pried it up with my pocket knife. Underneath, nestled in the insulation, was a metal tin, an old Band-Aid box. I opened it. I expected cash, or maybe a flask. It was a stack of Polaroids. I flipped through them. They were dated on the bottom in Sharpie. From last season, the handwriting belonged to Mac, the guy who manned Tower 9 before me. The first photo was dated June 1st. It showed the tower clearing. Wide. Open. You could see the outhouse 50 yards away, standing alone in a field of grass. The next photo, July 15th. The outhouse was still there, but there were 3 trees standing right next to it. Tall pines, they loomed over the little shack. I frowned. Trees don't grow 40 feet in 6 weeks. The next photo, August 3rd. The outhouse was gone. Not demolished. Just swallowed. The trees were so thick around it you couldn't see the roof. And then, the last photo, August 29th. This one was taken from inside the tower looking out the window. There was no sky, no horizon, just bark. A wall of extreme close-up pine bark pressed directly against the glass. On the back of the photo, Mac had written a note in shaky, erratic letters. They only move when the wind blows to hide the sound. They are camouflage. Don't let them touch the glass. If they touch the glass, they can smell you. I stared at the photo. Mac had been airlifted out early last season. Medical emergency, Dale had said. Mental breakdown. Now I knew why. I put the photos in my pocket. Outside, the wind picked up. The evening thermals were shifting. A low roar built in the valley. A gust was coming. I ran to the window. "Okay," I whispered. "Show me." The wind hit the tower, rattling the panes. The roar was deafening, sounding like a freight train, and the forest sprinted. It wasn't a lumbering walk this time. It was a chaotic, terrifying scramble. Hundreds of trees on the ridgeline uprooted themselves simultaneously. Their root balls exploded out of the dirt like frantic spiders. They surged forward, closing the distance to the tower by 20 yards in seconds. It looked like a stampede. Branches whipped and thrashed, not from the wind, but from the momentum of their bodies running. Then the wind died. Snap. Instantly motionless. They were closer now, just 100 yards from the base of the tower. I was shaking. I backed away from the window. "Dispatch!" I screamed into the radio. "Dispatch, emergency traffic!" "Tower 9, what is it now?" Dale asked. "They're attacking the trees. They're swarming the tower." "Kid, stop. You sound insane." "I have proof. Mac left photos. He saw it too." "Mac was a drunk," Dale snapped. "He was hallucinating from withdrawal. Don't be like Mac. Send a chopper. Get me out of here." "Negative. No birds fly at night unless there's a fire. You stay put. I'll drive up in the morning and we'll talk about your resignation. I will be here in the morning. Tower 9 out." He cut the connection. I threw the handset across the room. I was alone. I looked out the window. A deer had wandered into the clearing. A mule deer buck. It was grazing near the edge of the new tree line, oblivious. It walked right up to the white snag, the one I had seen first. The deer lowered its head to eat some grass at the base of the snag. The snag didn't wait for the wind. The trunk of the snag split open vertically. It didn't make a sound. The wood just parted, like a zipper. Inside it wasn't wood. It was wet pink meat. Ribbed muscle. The snag bent down at the waist a hinge that shouldn't exist in a tree. It enveloped the deer. It didn't bite. It just engulfed it. The two halves of the trunk snapped shut around the animal. There was a muffled crunch, no scream, just the sound of wet branches tightening. The snag stood back up, the split sealed. It looked like a dead tree again. But I saw a bulge in the trunk, a lump moving slowly down the length of the wood, like a snake digesting a rat. And then the snag turned. It rotated its upper branches. To face me, nightfall is usually beautiful up here. The stars come out so thick they look like spilled milk. Tonight the darkness felt heavy, like a lid being screwed down on a jar. I killed the lights in the tower. Mac's note said, "Don't let them touch the glass. If they touch the glass, they can smell you." I figured light might help them aim. I sat on the floor with the Osborne Fire Finder between me and the windows, clutching a Pulaski, a heavy firefighting tool that's half axe, half hoe. It was the only weapon I had. The wind had died down. It was dead calm, but I could hear them. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy rhythmic impacts shaking the ground. They weren't waiting for the wind anymore. They were moving in the dark, using the cover of night to hide their motion. I crawled to the window and peeked over the sill. I had a high-powered Spotlight 2 million candle power. I hesitated. If I turned it on, they'd know exactly where I was, but I had to know how close they were. I aimed the light down at the base of the tower and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark like a lightsaber. They were there. They were inside the perimeter fence. A dozen of them. Pines. Firs. A couple of larches. They were standing in a tight circle around the scaffold, their branches interlocked like a Roman phalanx. When the light hit them, they froze, but under the harsh halogen glare, the illusion fell apart. I looked at the bark of the nearest pine. It wasn't bark, it was skin. Thick, calloused, gray skin. Thick, calloused, gray skin, cracked and furrowed to look like wood plates. But in the cracks, I could see it pulsating. Veins throbbed with black fluid. I looked up at the needles. They weren't needles, they were sensory organs. Thousands of tiny, twitching antennae, tasting the air. They were all pointed at the tower. And the branches, they were limbs. Multi-jointed, twisted limbs ending in clusters of claws that mimicked pine cones. One of the trees, a massive Douglas fir, was right at the base of the stairs. It looked up. It didn't have a face. Not really, but in the knothole halfway up its trunk, a large wet eye opened. It blinked against the light. The pupil was horizontal, like a goat's. I gasped and killed the light. Darkness crashed back inches, and then the tower shook. Screesec, metal tearing, wood splintering. One of them had attacked the support beams. I scrambled back to the center of the room. The entire structure groaned and listed slightly to the south. They were cutting the legs. Think, I whispered. Think. They were biological. They were predators. They were using pack tactics. They were trying to topple the tower, to crack it open like a nut. Gnash. Glass exploded inward. A branch, a limb punched through the north window. It wasn't wood. It was a long gray arm covered in spikes. It thrashed blindly around the room, knocking over the coffee pot, sweeping the table clear. It was searching for me. I gripped the Pulaski. I waited until the limb swept near the floor. I swung. The axe head connected with a wet, meaty thunk. The limb didn't splinter. It severed. A geyser of thick, black sludge erupted from the wound, spraying the walls. It smelled horrific, like pine sol mixed with rotting meat. A pheromone bomb. The tree outside shrieked. It wasn't a wind sound, it was a vocalization. A high-pitched, vibrating scream that sounded like wood splitting in a vise. The limb retracted violently, spraying more black blood. I stood up, chest heaving. The scream triggered the others. From the dark below, a chorus of shrieks answered. S-C-R-E-E-L-Y-A. The tower shook violently now. They were swarming the supports. I looked at the window. The glass was shattered. The barrier was gone. The smell of the black blood was filling the room. It was making me dizzy. And it was doing something else. It was drawing them. The other trees were reacting to the scent of the wound. I looked down through the floor grate. They were climbing. Not the stairs. They were climbing the scaffold legs, wrapping their roots around the beams and hauling themselves up. I saw their shapes rising in the gloom, a rising tide of false timber. I couldn't stay here. If the tower fell, I'd be crushed or eaten. I had to get to the generator shed. It was a small metal building at the base of the tower. It was grounded. It had no windows. And it had the fuel. But to get there, I had to go down the stairs. I had to walk right through them. I looked at the door. I grabbed the Pulaski. I grabbed a flare from the emergency kit. I kicked the door open. The wind hit me, and standing on the catwalk blocking the stairs was the white snag. It had climbed the stairs silently while I was fighting the arm. It towered over me, 10 feet of pale, dead-looking muscle. The vertical slit in its trunk began to open. I saw the pink meat inside. I saw the half-digested remains of the deer, and I saw something else embedded in the wood near the top. A face. It was stretched, distorted, part of the camouflage pattern. But I recognized the beard. I recognized the glasses melted into the bark. It was Mac, the previous lookout. He hadn't been airlifted out. He had been intubated. Mac's mouth opened. "Run," he whispered. I didn't wait to ask Mac how he was doing. I swung the Pulaski. I aimed for the snag's midsection, right where the pink meat was exposed. The blade sank deep, biting into muscle and cartilage. The snag roared a wet gurgling sound and thrashed backward. It stumbled on the narrow catwalk. Its root feet scrabbled for purchase on the metal grating. It tipped over the railing. It fell 40 feet, crashing into the trees below with the sound of snapping branches and wet thuds. I didn't watch it land. I ran for the stairs. The scaffold was swaying violently now. The swarm below was shaking the foundations, trying to bring the whole structure down. I took the stairs 3 at a time. The metal clanged under my boots. Halfway down, a branch shot out from the dark structure of the scaffold. A pine limb, thick as a thigh, wrapped around my ankle. I fell hard, slamming my chest against the railing. My Pulaski skittered out of my hand and fell into the dark. The limb tightened. It had incredible strength. It dragged me toward the center of the scaffold, where the trunk of a massive fir was waiting. Its bark was peeling back to reveal rows of thorny teeth. I kicked at it with my free boot. I clawed at the railing. I remembered the flare in my pocket. I ripped it out. I popped the cap and struck it. Hiss! Red magnesium light exploded in the dark. I jammed the burning flare directly into the limb holding my ankle. The tree shrieked. The limb convulsed and let go. I scrambled up. gasping, and jumped the last 10 feet to the ground. I hit the dirt and rolled. I was in the middle of them. The clearing at the base of the tower was a nightmare. Dozens of trees were crowding around the legs of the scaffold. In the red light of the flare, they looked like monsters from a fever dream. Roots churning the earth, trunks bending like rubber, eyes opening in knotholes. They turned toward me. The light. They hated the light, but they saw me. I sprinted for the generator shed. It was 20 yards away. A spruce tree swiped at me. Its needles raked my back, tearing my shirt, drawing blood. I ducked under a flailing root. I reached the shed. It was a small corrugated steel box on a concrete pad. I threw the door open, dived inside, and slammed it shut. I threw the deadbolt. Bang! Something slammed into the door a split second later. The metal dented inward. Scrape. Claws of roots raked down the outside of the steel. I was trapped. The shed was tiny. It held the diesel generator, a few jerry cans of fuel, and some tools. There were no windows, just the one door. I collapsed against the generator, panting. Outside, the scraping intensified. They were testing the shed. Looking for seams, I heard the roof creak. One of them had climbed on top. I looked around the shed. I had fuel, I had the generator, and I had a realization. I was a fire lookout. My job was to stop fires. But these things, they were wood. Or close enough. Cellulose and meat. They would burn. And I had 50 gallons of diesel fuel sitting right next to me. I looked at the jerry cans. I looked at the dented door. If I stayed here, they would peel this shed open like a tin can. If I opened the door, I had to burn them. I had to burn the whole damn ridge. It was a federal crime. Arson on federal land, destruction of government property. But it was that, or be eaten by a tree with Mac's face on it. I grabbed a jerry can. I unscrewed the cap. I started splashing diesel all over the floor of the shed. I soaked some rags I found on a shelf. I grabbed a second can. This one I would take with me. I checked my pockets. I had my lighter. And I had one more flare. I stood by the door. I could hear them breathing outside. A low wheezing sound. I put my hand on the deadbolt. "Okay," I whispered. "You want to eat? Eat this." I unlocked the bolt. I kicked the door open. They were right there, a wall of gray skin bark and twitching needles. I threw the open jerry can of diesel directly into the face of the nearest tree. It sputtered, blinded by the fuel. I struck the flare. I tossed it. The air whooshed. The diesel ignited instantly, but it didn't just burn the fuel. The tree itself caught fire, and it burned fast. The black blood, the sap, was flammable, highly flammable. The tree screamed, a sound so loud it popped my ears. It turned into a pillar of fire in seconds. It thrashed, colliding with the trees next to it. The fire spread on contact. The sap acted like napalm. Within 10 seconds, the entire cluster of trees around the shed was an inferno. They panicked. They didn't act like trees anymore. They acted like animals. They tried to run. They uprooted themselves, stumbling over each other, spreading the fire as they collided. It was a stampede of burning timber. I ran through the gap they left in their panic. I ran toward the trail. Behind me, the fire was climbing the tower. The scaffold was burning. The heat was intense. I could feel the hair on my arms singing. I didn't stop. I ran down the trail, the light of the burning ridge casting long, dancing shadows ahead of me. I heard the screams of the forest dying. It sounded like a choir of the damned. I ran until I hit the fire road. I didn't look back, but I knew what I had done. I had started a forest fire in the middle of August, and I hoped it burned every single one of them to ash. I stumbled down the fire road for 3 miles before the smoke jumpers found me. I was a mess, ash-covered, bleeding from the back, smelling of diesel and burnt pine. They'd seen the plume from the base. They thought I had been caught in a lightning strike. "Tower 9 is gone," I told the lead jumper, a guy named Rick. It's all gone. We see that, son, Rick said, looking at the raging inferno on the ridge. Did the generator blow? No, I said. I did it. I burned them. Rick looked at me strangely. Burned who? The trees, the ones that walked. He exchanged a look with his partner. Shock, he mouthed. They airlifted me out. The fire burned for 3 days. It consumed 4,000 acres of the Lolo National Forest. The official report blamed a faulty generator line that sparked a brush fire. They said the accelerant traces were from the fuel cans exploding. They explained the screaming sounds reported by the smoke jumpers as escaping gases from the green wood. They explained the lack of animal carcasses as successful evacuation of wildlife. They discharged me. Acute stress reaction. Acute stress reaction. They recommended therapy. I didn't tell them about Mac's face in the bark. I didn't tell them about the snag eating the deer. Who would believe me? I moved to Seattle. I needed concrete. I needed a place where the only green things were manicured, potted, and controlled. I got a job in a warehouse, night shift, no windows. I felt safe. For a while. 6 months later, I was walking to work. It was a rainy Tuesday. The city had just finished a Green City initiative. They had planted saplings in concrete planters all along 4th Avenue. Little maples, oaks, decorative trees. I walked past them every day. I ignored them. They were small, harmless. But today, something made me stop. I was tying my shoe next to a planter. A gust of wind blew down the street, funneling between the skyscrapers. The sapling in the planter swayed, but it didn't sway with the wind. It leaned against the wind. I froze. I was kneeling right next to it. My face was inches from the thin, gray trunk. I looked at the mulch in the planter. The dirt was moving. Tiny white root fingers were shifting the soil, adjusting their grip. I looked up at the trunk. There was a knot in the wood, right at eye level. As I watched, the knot split open. A tiny, wet eye looked out at me. It blinked. And then, a small, horizontal slit opened below the eye. A mouth. Fire, it whispered. It was a baby. A seedling. And it remembered me. I scrambled back, falling onto the sidewalk. People walked around me, staring. "Are you okay, man?" someone asked. I pointed at the tree. It spoke. It moved. The pedestrian looked at the tree, then at me. He shook his head and walked away. I stood up. I backed away from the planter. The sapling was still now, just a tree. But I knew. The spores. The smoke from the fire. It had carried the seeds. They weren't just in the forest anymore. They were here, in the city, in the planters, in the parks, in the backyards, waiting to grow big enough, waiting for the wind. I ran. I haven't stopped running. I live in the desert now. Arizona, where nothing grows taller than a cactus. But sometimes, when the wind blows through the saguaros, I swear I can hear them shifting. And I wonder, do cacti have eyes? Actually, I'm not done. There's one thing I left out. The thing I saw on the fire. When the ridge was burning, right before I ran, I looked back at the generator shed. The fire was roaring, turning the trees into torches. They were screaming, thrashing, dying. But in the center of the inferno, standing calmly amidst the flames, was the white snag, the one I had knocked off the catwalk. It was burning, but it wasn't screaming. It was standing upright. Its bark skin was black and charred, peeling away to reveal the raw red muscle underneath. It was looking at me, and it was changing. The heat wasn't killing it. It was catalyzing something. The branches were fusing together. The trunk was reshaping. It wasn't a tree anymore. It was forming legs. Two massive, thick legs made of twisted wood and muscle. It was forming arms. And a head. A giant, charred, wooden humanoid. A golem of the forest. It raised one hand and pointed at me, and then it walked into the smoke. Not away from the fire, through it. It walked down the other side of the ridge, disappearing into the unburned forest. I didn't tell Rick, the smoke jumper. I didn't tell the doctors. But I know what I saw. The fire didn't destroy them. It forced them to evolve. They don't need to hide as trees anymore. They have a new shape. And they are angry. I'm sitting here in my apartment in Phoenix. It's 110 degrees outside. No trees, just sand and rock. But I went out to my balcony this morning. I keep a cactus out there. A barrel cactus. Native. Safe. Or so I thought. The cactus was split open. Something had burrowed into it. Or erupted out of it. Sitting in the center of the ruined, pulpy flesh was a single, blackened pine cone. It must have been a spore. Stuck to my boot. Dormant. Waiting for a host. I reached out to grab it. It was warm to the touch, and it was ticking, tick, 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 like a clock, or a heartbeat. I took it out to the balcony. I put it on the concrete railing. I was about to throw it over the edge, but then the ticking stopped. The scales of the pine cone shifted. They opened, and a voice tinny, but unmistakable came out of it. It was Mac's voice. Found you. I dropped it. It fell 3 stories to the pavement below. I packed my bag. I'm leaving tonight. I don't know where I'm going. Maybe the ocean. Maybe Antarctica. Somewhere without soil. But I had to warn you, if you see a tree that looks out of place, if you see a snag that looks like a person, if you smell pine and rotting meat, don't wait for the wind. Burn it. Burn it all down before it learns to walk on 2 legs.